The BYU Cougars are now 1-0 on the season thanks to a dominant showing Saturday night at LaVell Edwards Stadium. What did we learn after reviewing the tape? We're talking about that and also looking at how this affects BYU's chances of going to a bowl game this season as well. It's all ahead on today's show.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day, and thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here on your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at 5 Hour Energy. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB. Receive 20% off your order at 5hourenergy.com. Offer only valid until the end of the month, September 30th, and cannot be combined with other promotions. But once again, check it out at 5hourenergy.com using the promo code LOCKEDONCFB. All right, let's dive right in on today's show. As we do during the football season, I go back and rewatch the entirety of each BYU game. And on Monday, I like to call it a Film Review Monday. It's a simple term, but we look back at what we learned from the previous game for the BYU football program. Then we spend essentially the rest of the week looking ahead to their next opponent. In this case, it'll be SMU on a Friday night. So a short week for BYU. Got to get right into prep mode today, obviously getting themselves ready for that trip down to Dallas. But looking back at the game against Southern Illinois, I talked about it on our postcast edition of the podcast, and just a quick tip to make sure you don't miss those that come out after I'm done with my radio responsibilities late Saturday night, early Sunday morning in some circumstances, essentially giving you my initial takeaways from the game, getting your feedback and the like on the show. But as I went back and watched the tape for BYU, my feeling on BYU's performance overall against Southern Illinois didn't change much, because I really think it was a phenomenal showing, all things considered, for the BYU Cougars. The one thing I was looking forward to for BYU going into that game is I wanted to see them get some of the swagger and mojo back into this program. It's a pretty downtrodden team. Think about it, over the last 9 months or so. They have been told time and time again, y'all aren't nothing. You guys are going to finish dead last in the Big 12. And now they're picked 13th out of 16 teams. But they were being very lightly thought of by a lot of the prognosticators out there about this season. And they still very well could end up near the bottom of the table. But I think that game against Southern Illinois, no matter the opponent, no matter how it came, the win, I think, did some good for this BYU football program. I think these players now realize, you know what, maybe we're not as bad as everybody tells us we are. And I watched that tape back, and you can tell BYU, as that game started, they were still a little bit tight. And the thing is, Southern Illinois said, you know what, we're going to force you guys to really break us out of what we want to do defensively. The one play, rewatching it, that I really felt like ignited everything for BYU in this game was the deep ball to JoJo Phillips. And I know that's easy to say when you have a 57-yard touchdown pass that's pinpoint accurate, and a guy like JoJo Phillips just runs underneath a ball from Jake Retzlaff and is celebrating in the end zone. Yeah, it's easy to say that it ignited the BYU Cougars. But think about it. Leading up to that, there were so many things on film that I saw that BYU just a little tight. And I don't, that term is nebulous. I get that. But any of you who have watched football for any length of time know what I'm talking about. You're playing essentially not to lose. You're not playing fast and loose. You're not playing to go out there for the love of the game. And that's what I saw. Finally, when Jake uncorked that deep one to JoJo Phillips, you could kind of tell his team's like, all right, we're good. Let's do this thing. Now, the other part about this is, I will say this. Southern Illinois started that game and said, we are going to force BYU to loosen us up in terms of our run fits. They had safeties routinely 5 and 6 yards off the ball, when typically most safeties will probably play 10 to 12 yards off the ball. They brought guys into the box saying, okay, force us out of this. Force the ball down our throat, or force us to back off with the deep ball. A good friend of the podcast here, Travis, I'm going to give you your props, because Travis texted me in the lead up to this game on our Locked On Cougars Insider group and said, Jake, the philosophy BYU needs to adopt in this game is to pass to set up the run. And I quibbled with it a little bit. We went back and forth as to why. But as that game unfolded, and especially, like I said, that deep ball that went to JoJo Phillips, essentially, it opened up everything that BYU tried to do the rest of the game when it came to the run game. It forced Southern Illinois to back their safeties off and have to obviously leave safeties over the top to help protect against deep balls. The other part about this, rewatching this game, A lot of people out there, and I've got to make sure I get the notes right here. Yeah, I'm looking at my phone. 47 rushes, just 3.8 yards per carry. I know there's some angst around the fact that BYU couldn't get north of 4 yards per carry. There is a lot of work to be done still in the run game. But the one thing that BYU proved was that run game set up everything else they tried to do. Think about it. What touchdowns did Jake connect on? Look back at those plays. They're play action. Those were all set up by the fact that BYU jammed that ball down Southern Illinois' throat time and time again and made them absolutely bite on the fakes. Jake comes off that, tosses the ball down the field. The one to Mata'ava Ta'ase was a great throw, I thought. Obviously, JoJo Phillips is the highlight reel play because it's a career long for Jake Retzlaff. Everything was predicated upon opening up the rushing attack by throwing the ball. But then once you had that run game going, play action off of it and really make Southern Illinois pay. I was actually really, really pleased with the overall cohesive nature of how BYU played in this game. A couple of guys that stood out to me on tape. Let me pull this up here. First thing is, I think Jake Retzlaff, his performance, I thought was very, very solid. He was 20 of 30. That's 66.7%, folks. And I counted at least 3 what I consider to be drops from receivers. So that would put him at 23 out of 30 had those been brought in. And then I also counted what I consider to be 3 misses by Jake Retzlaff. Now, you say 3 misses. There are 3 throws I saw in that game that Jake, I'm sure, is looking back at film saying, you know what, I probably should have had that throw there. So you think about it. If he had those 6 passes of the 10 he had incompletions on, so you would have gone from 20 of 30 to 26 of 30. That would have pushed him into the 80% category in terms of completion percentage. He was really, really close to having a phenomenal game. And as multiple people have pointed out, Jeff Hansen, as well as Casey Lundquist over there at Cougar Sports Daily, part of Sports Illustrated, Jake was one of the highest rated players according to PFF grades for BYU. That's awesome to see. Because remember, this was a guy that was lambasted, was thought to be no good. He couldn't get the job done for BYU, and he proved he could get it done. Other things I liked in this game. I really liked what I saw from Caleb Etienne. A similar circumstance. PFF graded him out as the best offensive lineman for BYU. And wait for it. The PFF grade for run blocking. Guess who had the highest run blocking grade across the entire offensive line for BYU? Yeah, the man who seemingly couldn't get the job done a season ago, Caleb Etienne. He looks like a man reborn out there. He was very, very good at left tackle for BYU. I think it's a testament to the work that TJ Woods has done with that young man in particular. I thought the offensive line across the board was quite solid. No false starts, no administrative penalties, we like to say. The holding call on Connor Pay, and we'll talk with him this week about it. I thought it was ticky-tack at best, but kind of par for the course for how bad the officiating was in that game overall. One other thing here is the BYU's defense. Some of you were wondering, well, why is there so much inconsistency on defense? I watched that game back, and BYU is rotating 4 and 5 guys at different positions throughout that game. The rotation was as heavy as I literally have ever seen it for BYU in that game. I think the philosophy was, this is the game. We're going to get a good look at everybody in game. We'll go back, reevaluate it, and then starting with SMU, you'll see those rotations tighten up quite a bit. I saw 5 different safeties at points at different parts of the field. Guys like Tanner Wall, who started the game. The next series, there was another guy out there, Tommy Prass. We saw Falatau Satuala. We saw Crew Wakely, Ethan Slade. I'm just looking at the safeties in particular. The defensive line, everybody I can think of that was suited up on the D line saw time in this game, and evidence of that was that BYU's team captain, one of the best defensive linemen they've got, Tyler Batty. I had him down for 1 tackle and 1 QB hit the entire night. You can expect against SMU and going forward, you're going to see a lot more of him on the field versus the heavy rotation BYU had in that game. It felt like BYU was using the game against Southern Illinois to get an extra look on tape at each one of these guys on defense, and then you'll tighten it up from here with the rotations. But it was a really, really interesting thing to see, literally series by series, multiple guys getting multiple looks at different positions. I think that was a decision made going into that game to get a heavy look at guys. Other things, Evan Johnson, pay attention to this young man. He was very, very good. Now, that disputed pass from Southern Illinois that should have been ruled incomplete, he was right in position. He was right there. And I have heard whispers about Evan Johnson being a very solid player, but he was kind of the fourth man on the depth chart at cornerback for BYU in this game. Obviously, you have Jacob Robinson and Mark Collins leading the way. Maury Bamba, who figures to be number 3, was injured and unable to play in this game. Well, Evan Johnson stepped up, and I thought he was actually very, very good for BYU. So keep an eye on Evan Johnson, number 21. He was a really, really, I thought, high-level player in that contest. And then the final note I got for you guys in terms of other guys I was paying attention to, I really liked what I saw from Blake Mangelson along that defensive line. His move from defensive end to defensive tackle looks like a stroke of genius. Whoever ultimately decided to do that, whether it was Jay Hill, Sione Puha, deciding, hey, I need that guy on the interior, I'm still a bit concerned at the lack of quote-unquote girth from BYU, because John Nelson and Blake Mangelson, who I figure will be your starting 2 defensive tackles right now for BYU, neither one of them, I think, are breaking 290 right now. They're probably weighing 285 a pop, but their speed was really, really evident in this game. And I thought Blake Mangelson in particular stood out to me on tape. So once again, I go back to kind of what I said to start off this podcast, is that my feeling about the performance for BYU overall makes me actually feel a lot better about BYU's chances going into their game against SMU in the rest of the season, because I think it got some of that mojo, some of the swagger, got them feeling good about themselves. It's not perfect by any means. I would grade it out probably as a B+ effort overall across the board for BYU. I'd give the offense probably an A-. I'd give the defense probably an A- as well. Special teams kind of brings it down. I'd probably say a B- on the special team. So kind of brings me to where I'd probably say it's a B+, A- performance. But there's a lot to build on for BYU, and that should be something that you should take confidence in about this squad. Well, how do the metrics say that game affected BYU's chances of getting to that 6th win and bowl eligibility this fall? Well, ESPN's Football Percentages Index, they call it FPI, it had its say on what it projects for BYU, and we'll talk about that next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at 5 Hour Energy. Now, 5 Hour Energy here for you guys to get you through your day. A lot of us hit the wall in the afternoon. Trust me, I do early morning radio. Mid-afternoon, I am almost dead to the world at points, it feels like at times. So the nice part is, tired after lunch, more than 70% of us hit that wall after our lunchtime break. Let a 5 Hour Energy help you leap over the wall instead of crashing into it, and help you get through the rest of your day and have that energy. The best part is you also can get in the zone with our friends at 5 Hour Energy. And our 5 Hour Energy shots give the feeling of alertness and energy you need to get in the zone and get through the rest of your day and get the job done. 5 Hour Energy, is the brand hardworking people like you have been trusting for over 20 years to give them the alert, energized feeling they need to get through a busy, hectic day every single day. You always know what you find, where you can find your 5 Hour Energy shots, right at the cash register at nearly every convenience, drug, and grocery store nationwide. And more importantly, you can stock up now with our promo code and save on your 5 Hour Energy shots. All you got to do is go to 5hourenergy.com. That's the number 5hourenergy.com. You get some 5 Hour Energy product and use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. Heard that right. Promo code LOCKEDONCFB to get 20% off. Reminder, this offer is only available until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions, and the code is not good on subscription orders either. So go to 5hourenergy.com today and take advantage of the offer. That's LOCKEDONCFB is the promo code at 5hourenergy.com. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you have not done so already, make sure you check out our friends over the Locked On College Football podcast. Spencer McLaughlin has got your look at everything going on nationally. We're kind of hyper-focused here on BYU, but if you want a better feel for overall when it comes to college football, check out Locked On College Football wherever you get your podcasts. It's also available on YouTube, and it's proud to be part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, as I mentioned, ESPN's FPI, the Football Percentages Index, re-ranks these games for BYU shortly after each one goes final. And obviously, it jostles around and it gets affected by the win and loss and how the win or loss came for these programs. What does it say for BYU's chances of getting to a 6th win this season after the game against Southern Illinois? Well, it has a positive impact. So obviously, when you get a win, it's going to make the computers think, okay, they got a better chance here. The nice part is BYU, according to most of our sports books out there, our friends at FanDuel have this as well, have BYU as a double-digit underdog going up against SMU this Friday down there in Dallas. I saw it open it up at 10 points across most of the sports books, including FanDuel. But what does that say for BYU's chances? Well, Football Percentages Index from ESPN had BYU with a 19.7% chance to beat SMU in the preseason. After the win against Southern Illinois, they boosted their chance to 21.3%. So relatively negligible increase, but a increase in terms of their chance to win all the same. The other part about this is if you look at the overall percentages across the board for BYU, the Cougars, which were projected to win 4 to 5 games by the FPI, it was like 5. What was it? No, right here. 5.2 was the projection in the preseason. It is boosted to 6.8 after week 1. Now, once again, this will be adjusted week by week, but the projection is to go from not making a bowl to being 7-5 potentially at the end of the season based on the week 1 performance. That should lead you to think that BYU's got a really good chance this season to make some noise out there. Now, let's also acknowledge the fact that BYU still has to face the meat and potatoes portion of their schedule. They will play all 5 of the preseason ranked Big 12 teams. They obviously have Kansas State to open up Big 12 play. You're going to have Arizona coming in. You got to face off against Oklahoma State. You got the renewal of the Holy War game against Utah, and then obviously you still have Kansas out there as well. It's going to be a really, really tough slate of games for BYU, but ESPN and their numbers, they simply crunch numbers. This FPI, it takes into no account personal bias and the like. It simply looks at numbers and then spits out what it believes will happen for BYU. And it believes that BYU is a better team than it was anticipating going into the season. Am I saying anything that any of you probably are going to disagree with? I don't think so, but you look at it, BYU is going to look at wins potentially, as it points out, against the likes of Houston and Wyoming. They've got major boosts in terms of the overall win numbers there. Wyoming, after they got absolutely smashed by Arizona State, Wyoming has a 79.2% chance of BYU winning on the road in Laramie. Houston, who got thoroughly dominated by UNLV at home, that's at 80.8%. Those are the top 2 in terms of BYU's chances of winning those games. The next highest is Baylor at 39.8%. So you're going to have work to do, speaking of the Cougars. But the thing is, you look at each one of these numbers, all of them except for, let's see, I saw 2. Only 2 of them, UCF and Utah, the back-to-back road games for BYU, stretching late October to early November. Those are the only 2 games after week 1 that the numbers went down. Actually, no, excuse me. Apologies. Arizona State also went down. So those 3 went down after week 1 performances across the board. But FPI's projected win total for BYU has them at 6.8 after week 1 and also gives them a 43% chance of reaching bowl eligibility this season. That's the type of stuff that winning the games that BYU wins like they did against Southern Illinois, that's going to make people think, okay, they got a fighting chance here. I didn't think coming into the season that BYU was an absolute disaster waiting to happen. I think some of you probably thought that, but the other thing is they had a lot to prove. And I think that game against Southern Illinois is going to show some people, hey, this is a team that's still got some pride in it. They're not out there just going through the motions. The other part about it is I looked back at last season and the fight BYU put up against both Oklahoma and Oklahoma State with their back against the wall showed me everything I felt like I needed to see about this team. No, they didn't win the games. I get that. They did not win those games. But what they showed in those games was a refusal to essentially back down and just say, oh, yeah, we're screwed here. We can't win in this circumstance. They refused to say die. The whole adage of Goonies never say die. Well, that's kind of what BYU's whole mentality was. They were fighting for bowl eligibility last season. They're very easily the caliber of opponent, speaking of the Oklahoma Sooners and obviously the Oklahoma State Cowboys. BYU could have said, you know what? This season's over. Let's just mail it in and let's get through this and obviously look towards the offseason. They actually did the opposite. They kind of said, you know what? We're going to go out there and we're going to absolutely punch until we can't punch anymore, to use the boxing analogy. And if we come through with a big win and a big knockout and we get a chance to go to the postseason, great. But they put the fight in there. And I think that the losses overshadowed that fight from this team. And I think the numbers now from this ESPN FPI indicate that all of us, I'll include myself in this conversation, looked at BYU and judged them probably a little too harshly, when it came to the 5-game losing streak to end the year. There were not very many good vibes, obviously, in the losses to the likes of West Virginia, But when you came as close as you came against the Oklahoma Sooners, and then obviously in double overtime against Oklahoma State to end the season, I think it showed that BYU refused to give in and to essentially say, yeah, we're going to mail this in, because I think they understood what they were up against. And these numbers now indicate, after the win against Southern Illinois, this is a team that's still got a lot of pride. It's still got some talent. Is there a need for more talent? No doubt. This is a team that's far from being the elite of the elite when it comes to the Big 12. But there is a backbone with this team. And I think they reflect kind of the steely nature. Kalani Sitake going into the season, remember last week we talked about it. He had a pretty hard edge to him during that Monday press conference last week. And I don't care what you guys say. I've listened to this guy's press conferences and talked with him one-on-one multiple times. That was fairly edgy from him. I think his team backed up that edginess and went out there and put on a performance that said, you know what? We know we're being overlooked here. We're going to show y'all what we got in the tank. And I'm happy for it. I love when I get a chance to obviously eat crow in a way when I was doubting some of what BYU might be able to do this year. But the goal for me still remains, just get to 6 wins. Anything beyond that this year, I think, is gravy. And I know that sounds artificially low, and it feels like I might be setting the bar for BYU too low in your mind, but they were 5-7 a season ago. Can you get to bowl eligibility and show that you're making progress along the path here? I think you can, and obviously that will require grinding out 5 more wins at some point this season, and it'd be great to get a second one this weekend against SMU, even if the FPI numbers believe that you have a 1-in-5 shot really of winning that game. I don't think SMU is insurmountable by any means. Just watching that game against Nevada a couple weeks ago in week 0, that SMU team looked imminently beatable. They looked like a team that was very, very undisciplined. And one thing I liked about BYU from Saturday night was their discipline was very, very evident in that game against Southern Illinois. If you can be the more disciplined team, more often than not, you're going to give yourself a fighting chance in those games. And I know it's a road game and BYU has to travel to Texas, but I'm feeling pretty good about this SMU game at the outset of this week. Now, could that change as the week progresses? Sure. But I feel like BYU knows what they're up against and they're ready for the fight. And they're going to be willing to go in there and put it all on the line when they take on the Mustangs. And they've got history with the Mustangs as well. And we'll discuss that throughout the week as well, because you can go all the way back to 1980 and the famed Holiday Bowl, the Miracle Bowl for BYU. And we'll maybe do a little bit of a history lesson on BYU and SMU's history a little bit later on this week as well. So numbers overall, I think very positive for BYU, and reflecting, I think that this team, they've got more in the tank and more fight in them than I think many of us may have been giving them credit for coming off of last season. All right, we'll finish up today's show with a quick look at what happened over the weekend for other BYU sports, as well as 2 offers that went out over the weekend. BYU beginning work on the 2027 recruiting cycle with a couple of offers that went out after the win over Southern Illinois. We'll delve into that next as we continue on right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Ultimate GM. Now, Ultimate College Football HC is the brand new game that Ultimate GM has just launched. And the best part is it's an amazing game of simulation that allows you to step into the shoes of being a college head coach and lead your program to glory. Think of it this way. It's the off-field stuff that you see in EA Sports College Football 25 without having to deal with a lot of the other stuff that goes on in that game. It's just one facet of this. But the nice part is you get to kind of sit behind the scenes, make the right decisions on hiring your coaching staff, you overseeing training camps, handing out your school's scholarships to each athlete, and more importantly, you control every crucial detail of your program to make sure that it is operating at peak capacity. And then in-game, you're responsible for calling the offensive plays. So essentially, your strategy not only determines the success of your football season on the gridiron, but also shapes the future and legacy of your program as well. The nice part about Ultimate College Football HC is it's 100% online, has no ads, is 100% playable, not online, but offline, there. You can play on the go as you want and when you want. And of course, you have a special offer for Locked On Cougars listeners. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, inside the game to receive a free boost or bonus to start your program. It's a great way to get you off on a running start on the game. Download the game now by going to ultimate-cfb.com. That's ultimate-cfb.com, or look it up on the app stores. That's Ultimate College Football HC. Begin your coaching legacy today. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you have not done so already, what are you waiting for? Sign up for our Locked On Cougars Insider Group. Get the inside scoop on everything I'm hearing about BYU football, basketball, and everything beyond that. in the form of a text message coming to your phone when I send them out. Does not get much more direct than that and more intimate than that. You can have one-on-one conversations with me as well via text message. If you'd like to join us today, check out the link in the show notes below, whether you're watching this on YouTube or wherever you're listening, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the like, and join us today. It's a 14-day free trial and then just $5 a month afterwards, and it's a great way to get the insider scoop on everything BYU sports that I am hearing on a daily basis. All right, let's talk about BYU recruiting for just a moment here before we wrap up today's show. In the aftermath of BYU's win on Saturday, I saw these offers go out. They were announced by the individual athletes about their offers. The first one, both of them, by the way, come from Maple Mountain High School down in Mapleton, Utah, so a stone's throw away from BYU. But you work from home and obviously expand out from there if you're BYU. And they have offered two defensive end type pass rush types from Maple Mountain. The first is Uhila, Matekitonga, Finefeuiaki, Wolfgramm. Yeah, that's a name right there, everybody. Uhila is a 6'3", 215-pound defensive end for Maple Mountain. His stats early on the season are actually pretty solid. He's got, I'm seeing on Max Preps, I see him with, I think, is it 3 sacks on the season already? 3.5 sacks for 3 games for Maple Mountain. 5 solo tackles, 13 overall on the season. But more importantly, he's also averaging, he's got 5 tackles for loss on the season as well. So very disruptive player, but he's a young player. 2027 class is a very young athlete at this point, but 6'3", 215, that's very, very good size for his age. And his teammate, Ioane, and that's a easier name to say than Uhila, his name, Ioane got an offer from BYU Saturday night as well. He's listed at 6'2", 165 pounds, lists himself as a defensive end, a quarterback, and a wide receiver for Maple Mountain High School. His statistics so far this year show him as a defensive player as well. He has got a grand total of 1.5 sacks through 3 games this year, 6 total tackles. But the thing about this is if you look at these two players, they project as high-level pass rush types that BYU absolutely needs to have their defense thrive at the highest level. Watch what happened Saturday night. BYU started generating pressure, and that made things absolutely unlock for BYU's defense. All of a sudden, the secondary feels a lot more confident about themselves when the pass rush is harassing DJ Williams, the Southern Illinois quarterback, when he's having to scramble all the time. Yeah, he carved you up with his legs, but here's the thing. He was literally the only weapon with his feet that Southern Illinois had. BYU made them about as one-dimensional as you can make them in that game, and the other part about this is you can scheme better to contain QB run going forward. So it was a very, very solid defensive outing for BYU. And the nice part is I think these two young men, speaking of Ioane and then Uhila Wolfgramm, can look at this and say, you know what? I can see myself fitting in this defense. Now, BYU is the second offer to both of these young men. The University of Utah offered them earlier on in the week. But I think this is BYU realizing that we need to capitalize on some of the success we're having right now. BYU, the only way they're going to continue to increase in terms of their overall talent base is to get in early with these young men. And they've done a fairly good job over the years of being one of the first, if not the first through the door to offer young men these scholarships. And in this case, they were second because Utah beat them just by a few days. But continue to make them feel the love and continue to sell them on the vision you have for this program. Show them what BYU is doing defensively. Look at that tape against Southern Illinois and point to them and say, hey, you can be Isaiah Banya in this defense, or you can be a guy like Ephraim Asiata. You can do exactly what those guys are doing, and that's going to make them think, okay, you know what? I got a legitimate chance here to be an impact player for BYU, and obviously they can put on for their hometown because Mapleton's 2 cities over from Provo. And that's the nice part about this is BYU has it all in their hands right now when it comes to recruiting. So congratulations to both Jag as well as Uhila on those offers, and we'll see how things progress in the coming days and months, obviously, because they have plenty of time. The 2027 recruiting cycle, just for example, right now in the 2025 class, we're talking about guys who are freshmen and sophomores right now getting offers from BYU. There's plenty of time for them to develop, kind of grow into their frames, and also continue to hone their skills. But BYU sees something in both of these young men, and they want to get into it, get in on the sweepstakes very early on here. Two other quick notes before we go on today's show is a tough loss for BYU women's soccer after a loss against UCLA at midweek last week. They lost to number 19 Utah State 2-1 on South Field. So the BYU women's soccer program on a 2-match losing streak now, crazily enough. The Cougars were ranked 16th in that game against Utah State. We'll see where they end up in the rankings after those 2 losses. It wouldn't surprise me if they fall out of those rankings, but we'll see how that plays out today when those new polls come out. And then also the 16th ranked BYU women's volleyball team opened their weekend with 3 big wins in the Cougar Classic, I think is what they had this weekend, but a big showing for them on the hardwoods over there at the Smith Fieldhouse as they got their season off to a positive start. But congratulations to the women's volleyball program on their wins over the weekend. So there you go. That's what I got for you guys on this Monday edition of the podcast. A big thank you as always for your continued support. We'll react to whatever Kalani Sitake and players have to say on tomorrow's show, and also we'll be getting you ready. We'll look at SMU, what to expect from the Mustangs, what can we learn from history against the Mustangs. We'll delve into all that as we continue all week long, getting you ready for that game against SMU down there in Highland Park, Texas. It's Dallas, but they're in quote unquote Highland Park, one of the metro areas in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. All right, that's it. Big thank you to all of you for tuning in. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And obviously a big thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.